I'm going to talk today about how to sew the basic bodice together for the Nordic style Scandinavian costume. You have 5 pieces: the back piece, the 2 side pieces, and the front pieces, which I will show in just a few minutes, and how to pin these together and how to sew them together. So you'll notice that I do have pins placed on the back side pieces, and that is to remind myself that this is the front of the piece, or the right side, and so I'm just going to be pinning the right sides together. Almost always you're doing the right sides. Very rarely do you do other than the right sides together. So when I sew the side piece to the back piece, I just make sure that there's a tiny little piece of the points at the top, so that when I am turning out the piece, when it's ready to go, it matches up just like that. So I'm just going to pin the side piece to the back piece. Some people find it easier to hold up the fabric when you pin it. I usually try to pin it this way so that if I'm sewing from either side, it's easy to pull the pin out. If you have fabric that you're having a problem with getting holes and things in, you can pin it along the seam line if you want to, so that you don't get holes in your fabric. This fabric is not having an issue, so I'm just going to pin it this way. So this is how it looks when both pieces are pinned together. It's okay if they overlap, it doesn't matter. Once you get it sewed together, it'll look differently, but I always check to make sure that my pieces are correct, because sometimes you get confused and you sew the pieces on the wrong side. Okay, this is what it looks like after it has been sewed together. So the iron is really important at this point. On the pattern for the shell of the costume, you want the seam allowance to be pressed down, and for the lining you want the seam allowance to be pressed up. So I'm going to press that down. I'm going to press on the back side, and then I'm also going to press on the front side. Once you have it all pressed down, you can see that maybe a few areas might need to be clipped on the other side. You don't have to clip it unless you see that it needs to be clipped, and then you can clip just that section only. So I just clipped a little bit here, and now you can see that it's nice and flat and smooth. And then next, I am going to sew this seam right down here all the way from the top to bottom. I'm going to do it on both sides. There's 2 reasons for that. One reason is that sometimes the fabric may have a little bit of fraying issue, and that will help keep that under control. And the other reason is it'll make the seam lay down nice and flat and smooth. Okay, I sewed these down as close to the edge as I could get, and now they're laying nicely and flat. Now we're ready to move on to sewing the front 2 pieces to the side. So we have our 2 front pieces here. We're going to make sure that we sew right sides to right sides, and that we have the correct edge in the correct position. So this is the front, and so we're going to sew these 2 pieces together. I'm going to pin them on, and then I'm going to sew them down. Okay, I have them all pinned, and then I'm going to sew. The directions on this pattern call for 5/8 seam on all the seams except for this one, where they call for a 1/4 inch. I usually do a 1/2 inch because I don't feel like a 1/4 of an inch is quite enough, and so I usually do a 1/2 inch seam on these two sides. Okay, this is how it looks at this point. All 5 pieces are sewn together, and I'm going to just go ahead and press the side seams down again because I have used many fabrics that fray. I will press it towards the back and then I will sew it down. Okay, I am all done sewing these 5 pieces together. Everything is ready to go. I'm going to give it a final press, and then I'm going to work on the lining of this costume. I'm going to do it exactly the same. The only difference is that when I press my seams, whichever way I went on the outside, I'm going to go the opposite for the lining. So if I've pressed it down on the outside, I'm going to press it up on the lining. And the same with all the other seams that I'm going to be doing. Again, you can see my pieces for the lining. I always mark them with a pin so I know which is the right side. So in case there's some variation in color or texture, I always get the correct side. So I'm just going to pin these on and sew these together. All right, got these all pinned together, and I'm going to just go sew those sides. Okay, so now I have the seams sewed. I press them towards the center because my other piece, the outside piece, was pressed away from the center. And so I'm going to just flip it over, and I'm going to make sure it's all pressed down nice and smooth. And then I'm going to go ahead and just stitch on the edges too to hold those down just like I did the shell. I do want to mention that I do measure at this point to see if I am close to the width of this piece, and it is. If it's not, then I'm going to modify this piece to make sure that the width is the same as the outside piece. At this point, once I have the 3 pieces sewn together for the lining, in addition to the outside piece done, I do lay out my lining piece onto the outside piece. I just want to see how I'm doing, if everything is lining up, if I need to do any modification. I prefer to do the modification on the lining piece. I don't want to change the outer piece or the shell. I want to make any changes to the lining. Right now it looks like it's lining up. It looks like I'm doing really good. It looks like where I need to go is very, very close. And so I will make a slightly bigger seam. Sometimes the lining pieces do stretch a little bit, so that does happen, or maybe I cut it just a little bit bigger. And so this is at the point where I like to see where those pieces are going to line up. Now I have my lining pieces all sewn together. I have just checked to see if everything is lining up as best as they can. And then the next step is for me to pin the 2 pieces together. I'm actually going to flip it over and pin it on the outside because that's the side I'm going to be sewing it on. So I'm going to just flip that over and pin it. I lay out my pieces on my ironing board. You can use a table, whatever works best for you. I like to lay the whole thing out and get it as flat and smooth as possible. I start from the top neckline here, and then I just work my way around. I'm just pinning all the way around, all the way to the top and all the way to the front. I'm not going to be sewing the bottom seam, so I don't need any pins there, but if you need to have it more secured, you can certainly pin it in that place as well. If I have any lining pieces that are a little bit sticking out, I am going to trim those down because it's just easier for me to sew if everything is even. I have sewn all the way around. I did sew on the top side, but I just wanted to show you the bottom side. Make sure that when you are sewing your two pieces together, do not go down too far and do not double stitch at the bottom because you're going to want that open for a later step. So once you get to this point, you're going to clip your corners. All these corners here are going to be clipped, and it recommends that you clip to 1/4 of an inch, but I do not do that. I clip to a 1/2 inch just because I like that little extra in case I need it in the future. In addition to clipping, I also do a little clipping in the corners so that, or the round parts here, so that when I turn it, it turns a little easier. So all done clipping on all the sides, so I'm ready to turn it inside out. I've turned it completely inside out now, and got all the corners turned, and everything's ready to be pressed now. One of the things I always make sure I do is to measure this point right here to make sure that each side is equal, because sometimes the corners get stuck in and you have to pull it out. I use one of these little turners to get all the little corners out in the straps and in the sides. And so I'm going to press it now. I find it easier to press on the lining side. I can see exactly where it needs to be pressed down and turned, and then also where it needs additional clipping. Now that everything is pressed down nice and flat, I'm going to just go ahead and top stitch all the way around, and then it will be ready to attach to the skirt. And there you have it, completely top stitched all the way around, ready to be attached to the skirt. You can't really see the top stitching because it's black on black, but you can kind of see it on this side. And so then the front is done like so, and then you bring it around to the front, and that's what the front looks like. It turned out really great. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It came through really flat and smooth. The back looks really good. And there it is. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully next time you'll see the next step.